Welcome to Appointed.
Well, I am overjoyed to be joined today by someone who I was just saying, I can't believe this is the first time you've been on the podcast. We've been working together for it feels like forever, although I know it's just a few years. But I'm so pleased to be joined by Dr. Jiaying Zhao. Am I saying it correctly? Yes, good. Goes by JZ to make it easier for us, folks who are not as proficient in as many languages as you are. And you're an associate professor at UBC and the Canada Research Chair in Behavioral Sustainability, the Sauder Distinguished Scholar, all in the Department of Psychology and the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability at UBC. I remember the first time I spoke to you, you were actually in California meeting with NASA to do something. So
That's right. Yeah.
you're doing stuff all over the place, and you have TED Talks, and I'm so pleased to also congratulate you on being a recipient of the King Charles Coronation Medal that you'll be getting in just less than 2 weeks here in the Senate. So that's fabulous. Your research has been instrumental in so many ways in terms of looking at the intersections of class, race, ability, as well as, really importantly, income and income disparity. And the work that you've done looking at the ways in which poverty directly impacts people's ability to think, to plan, to work on issues is, I think, some of the best I've seen in the world. And you're the first person that I've seen to track the ways that people spend money and to provide unconditional cash transfers to homeless people, knowing that they would likely spend it on things that they need, not frivolously the way many people who have money presume, with stigma and stereotype, negative stigma and stereotype applying to poor people, that they will just waste it. And so I want to talk a bit about how you came to this, why you do this work, there's so many parts of your research that I think we could talk about, but if we can zero in on some of the work you've done around this and how we came to know each other in terms of a mutual interest in looking at how do we address poverty in a way that assists people to actually rebound out of poverty, not keep them stuck in poverty the way the gazillions of dollars, and I know you've just got updated data on how much, like some $92 billion we're spending in this country to keep people in poverty, not to assist them to get out. So that's a lot, but I know you're the professional educator. So I look forward to hearing from you about how you came to do this, what you think the people listening to this really should know about poverty and the links to people's ability to think, and more importantly, what people do when they get money.
Great. Thank you, Kim, for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to talk about the work and also your work in Canada as well. So I came to this research both through personal and professional channels. So personally, I grew up in poverty in the 80s in China when everyone was poor. We're living on literally $10-ish, budget. And I remember my grandmother starving herself so that she could feed her grandkids like me. And that was a distinct personal memory in my consciousness, um, and I remember those kind of mental burdens of poverty that my family went through. But then my professional channel to this work was actually during my PhD at Princeton, when I worked with Eldar Shafir and Sendel Mullinatham to study the cognitive taxes of scarcity. And this means the mental burdens that poverty places on the human mind. By that I mean, when we're experiencing a shortage of money or food or social relationships or even time, we actually become so, focused on the fires that we have to put out right now. Getting food on the table, paying bills, meeting deadlines, such that we neglect more important things that we need to focus on. And that can lead to a vicious cycle that contributes to the psychological trap of poverty. So one example is if I'm giving time as an example. We all have deadlines, and right now I'm experiencing time scarcity because we're nearing the end of term at UBC. Um, and as I'm focusing on the deadline, the fires that I have to put out this week or even today, I'm neglecting sleep, food, family, health. I'm actually neglecting, I'm kind of forgetting now I need to pay tax, file my tax. It's tax season. So there are a lot of things that occupy our mental space. And as we juggle these important tasks, we in a, inevitably will, suffer. And uh, in terms of people under poverty, as they are struggling with financial burdens and financial challenges, they neglect the job training opportunities, the educational opportunities, what their children need, what their family need, what themselves need over the long term. And that really can exacerbate poverty itself. So that's my earlier PhD work. And since I got to UBC, I've been continuing that work. And more specifically, I've been working on using cash transfers to reduce the cognitive burdens of poverty and as a way to help people get out of poverty for the long term. And that's essentially why I did this work.
Hmm. Well, and incredible work. I mean, I want you to talk a bit about, I mean, you've hired people who have been on the street to help connect you with folks. And I wanted you to talk a bit about those cash transfers and what you found from that, what the research shows. When I say research, I mean, you basically have followed up with folks and they've will you describe what you've done? Because I get so excited about it. I want to describe it, but it's your work, so you describe.
Sure. This is the work I did a couple years ago. It's called the New Leaf Project with Foundations for Social Change. Um, and what we did was we gave people who are unhoused in Vancouver a one-time unconditional cash transfer of $7,500. It was unconditional. By that I mean they don't have to, spend it on certain things. They can spend it on whatever they wish. And the reason we did this project was because one, homelessness is extremely costly, not in terms of just in terms of economic costs. We actually spend, upward of $55,000 per person per year to manage somebody unhoused in Canada. But it costs lives, right? So uh, an average person who's unhoused lives 10 years shorter than somebody who's actually living housed. Um, and of course that we it's just to me it's an injustice that we actually see a kind of a crisis of homelessness in Canada. And that prompted us to provide financial supports to people who are experiencing homelessness. And the reason with, $7,500 was that was the annual income assistance in British Columbia when we designed the study. So essentially, when they're what we provide is the entire year of welfare equivalent to that. And well, so this is a randomized control trial. So it's a scientific study where we gave this one-time cash transfer to 50 individuals experiencing homelessness with another group of 65 individuals as controls. And we followed everybody over 1 year after the cash transfer. And what we found was several surprising results. I think would you like me to get into the specifics of the findings? Okay.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. So we found that first of all, on average, each cash recipient spent 99 fewer days in homelessness over 1 year. That's over 3 months on the street, and that was very encouraging for several reasons. One is we know that there is a housing shortage in Vancouver, but the fact that after they get the cash transfer, they actually are so resourceful. They knew exactly what they would spend the money on. They knew exactly what kind of housing they would want to get into, and they did. So they became housed most of them became housed within 1 month of the cash transfer, whereas in Vancouver, I think the average wait to get housing, if you're in the shelter, is 6 months, or was 6 months at that time. So we sped up the housing transition with the cash transfer. People also increased their spending, obviously, because now they have the cash transfer. They spend more money on food, rent, transit, and more on, clothing and, furniture, so durable goods, what we call, so things that will last. Um, I think that was also encouraging to see. Now, what you mentioned earlier was what we kind of what society suspected they would spend the money on, which is on temptation goods. So these are alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. And that's a stereotype that the society holds against people in poverty. And our data actually showed the opposite. There was no increase in spending on alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes after getting the cash transfer. So that was great to see. And there's actually a decline in substance use severity in the cash recipients as well over 1 year. So what this data all suggests is that once they receive the cash transfer, they get into housing right away. They spend the money on necessities. I mean, $7,500 in Vancouver is not a lot of money. It's only, I think it would provide, um, you know, uh, resources for a couple months. But we also saw a sustainable trend in their income. By that I mean, some participants actually worked more hours. They increased their hourly pay because they were able to get better paid jobs. I think that's partly why, their livelihood sustained after the one-time cash transfer. The reason was just they actually became more self-sufficient over time. Actually become more productive members of society overall. So we did a whole cost benefit analysis looking at the cost savings from this cash transfer. And because of the reduced reliance on social and health and justice services over 1 year, we were able to quantify the cost savings. The exact cost savings was actually a net savings. So subtracting the cash transfer itself, there was a net savings of over $700 per person per year. So this is actually less than what we currently spend on homelessness in Canada, or in Vancouver in particular. And this means that this is a, really cost-effective way to reduce homelessness.
Hmm. And you've continued that research. I know you started then another part of this project with $8,500, and now you're doing a costing of what it would cost to actually implement a guaranteed livable income throughout the country. And I'm really excited, of course, about that as well, because that's the way we met. Me, interested in the work you were doing and how we could intersect and work together on this. So I wonder if you can talk about how that led to then the next stages of what you're working on and what you're finding.
Yeah, so we are continuing this project with the unhoused population in Vancouver. So we expanded the cash transfer as well as the sample size um, currently with Foundations for Social Change. But on top of that, we're doing some analysis on a guaranteed livable basic income in Canada as a nation, what this would look like, how much it would cost, and how much it would save. So this is all modeling results that we have so far. So the one-time cash transfer is not technically not a basic income because it's not sustained. It's not regular payments. It's one time. But something like what you proposed as a guaranteed livable basic income is more like a monthly payment of much larger amounts. So, for instance, what we have in mind as a nation is to meet kind of actually, to be precise, is to lift people out of poverty, and the poverty line differs in different regions. So something like, let's say in Victoria, BC, for one person, the guaranteed basic income would look something like $24,000 per year. So it translates to $2,000 of payment every month. Now that I think that would effectively lift everybody out of poverty because that was the poverty line. So we benchmarked the poverty line to maybe 80%, so that would be down to $20,000, which means lifting most people out of poverty. And that can be expensive, as the PBO has estimated a few months ago. So if we were to do that as a nation, it actually costs us something like $42 billion as a country. Now, that's a lot of money, but it's not close to what we currently spend on poverty reduction. So right now, we did analysis on the cost of poverty to Canada, and this cost is based on lost productivity, so lost jobs, lost working hours, lost taxes from jobs, as well as excess spending on healthcare and crime because of poverty. And that cost amounts to $92 billion a year. That is more than twice the cost of the basic income.
Right.
So I think they just economically, it kind of makes no sense not to do it.
Yeah, economically, health-wise, society-wise, happiness-wise,
Yeah.
and so, but we're not able yet to convince politicians. I mean, many municipalities are on side because they see the direct impact. Not a big surprise, Victoria, Prince George, and, right across this country. I mean, when Ontario did the basic income pilot, more than half of the municipalities in Ontario wanted to be the test sites because they live every day with the impact of poverty in their communities. Provinces are coming on side. Every party has taken positions, and every party has members who are supportive. Some aren't allowed to talk about it, but every party has members of parliament or members of legislative assemblies who are supportive of this because they know it makes sense. So you're the psychologist. Why won't they just do it?
It goes back to the stereotypes and stigmas we have against people in poverty. And we actually measure that in dollar amounts. So we actually this is in the same paper as the cash transfer study that we published, where we asked people, this is people in the general public, how much do you think a unhoused person will spend on alcohol, drugs, rent, food? So we give them breakdown of the categories of spending, and they can just literally predict how these recipients would spend the cash transfer. And what we found in that study was there's a massive overestimation of spending on alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes compared to what the people actually spent. So that quantifies the mistrust piece that we think people will mismanage the money if they're given the cash transfer. I think that's a number one barrier that politicians as well as the public are against giving people in poverty money.
Even though we already do, but not enough for them to live and rebound out of poverty. We just give them enough to keep them stuck in poverty.
Yeah. Because what we currently give them as the welfare checks is highly insufficient. It's not enough. It's nowhere close to being sufficient. And
And I,
yeah, go ahead.
no, sorry, I interrupted you. I'm clearly getting excited about this and exercise, and then we blame them. Make them infinitely criminalizable by giving them insufficient resources, and then we pile on that if they actually do things, it could be $20 overpayment, it could be a $50 overpayment, gets characterized as fraud, and we pile on. Or they're selling their bodies or selling other things, drugs or other things to make money, and then we pile on instead of really addressing those issues. So the other issue some politicians have said is they're afraid, even though the Ontario Basic Income Project showed, you can see results really, really quickly. There's a belief in some politicians who are in favor that they won't actually see the benefit in their electoral cycle. Can you speak to that? Like, how do we counter that? I mean, your research is countering that, but how else do we counter that?
Yeah, that's the short-sightedness of politics. in most democracies, unfortunately, where they care about the electoral cycle. That the benefits are long term, not immediate. That if even if we do make this investment, we won't reap the rewards. It won't help us get it reelected, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this is all dumb, very dumb,
Yeah.
because two things. We can actually, I think we should reform the current welfare system, which is broken. And I think just by reforming and reallocating the budget to basic income from the, let's say employment insurance or several programs that we currently spend money on, can be cost effective. That already can save us more than $30 billion dollars a year. So that's
Wow.
not additional investment. That's just rearranging how we spend money and how we can, be more efficient in spending taxpayers' money. So that's number one. And number two is some of the savings are pretty immediate, as we seen in the homeless study in Vancouver. Within 1 month they get themselves housed. So the turnaround time is not decades, it's months. So
Hmm.
I would like to ask politicians to rethink the long-term benefits. It's not that long term. It's actually pretty immediate. It can, manifest within a year, and that's
Hmm.
that's that's what I want them to rethink the
Yeah.
savings.
Well, and the other thing that I'm pretty sure you're working on as well, because we've had this conversation, but you talked about EI reform. The governments have said we need to reform the employment insurance system because we saw during the pandemic, the system set up to deal with what we were dealing with in the pandemic was not fit for purpose. And so they had to do
Correct.
it through the income tax process. And I think it's you who's pointed out, like only about 40% of the people who might otherwise be eligible for employment insurance get it. And so
Yeah.
clearly that system needs to be reformed. And we're seeing it now with the threat of tariff, or not the threat, the tariffs from the US. The Canadian government is setting up yet another. I mean, we've been sort of lurching towards this with the Canada Child Benefit, the Guaranteed Income Supplement and Old Age Security, disability benefit, wholly inadequate as it is, and with no guarantees that provinces won't claw back. Some say the CERB was a step in that direction, but it was different. It was for the pandemic only, and it wasn't. There was no income testing, and
Yeah.
so in this context, now the government's saying, well, we're going to have a workers' benefit, and
Mm.
why, instead of having all of these multi layers of administration and the costs that go along with those, the financial as well as human costs that go along with programs that don't fit for everybody and multiple layers of administration, why not streamline the administration and make that cash available to assist the people who need it? And as PEI, the former premier of PEI said to me, we were in a deficit and we were projecting more deficits because of the pandemic. We got CERB, and suddenly, guess what? People spent the money in the economy, they didn't send it offshore.
Right.
And suddenly they had a surplus. So, is there any way that this is not a win for people and, the citizens
Yeah.
of the country and the government?
Yeah.
Am I missing something?
No, you're dead on this issue. I think the way we currently fight poverty is so inefficient, for two primary reasons. One is less than half of the eligible are not receiving income assistance for many reasons. Second, the overhead administering these benefits is are humongous. I mean, I think if you look at any provincial report on spending on poverty reduction, I mean, I'm going to take BC as an example. So in British Columbia, for instance, the Minister for Poverty Reduction, let me just pull up the exact numbers. Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, their budget is, the operational budget is over $5 billion dollars every year. They spend about $3 billion on income assistance, and I think the rest is overhead. And I think in some way you can argue, well, we need the staff to administer these things. True, we do. We have to, run these programs accurately. and limiting errors. That's number one. But two, because there's so many, I would call them band-aid solutions, right? There's there's all kinds of the worker benefit is another band-aid solution that it just sort of clogs up the pipeline. And now the kind of the overhead on the actual program becomes astronomical. And that's why I think basic income is a kind of a streamline uh, of these different band-aids. It can be way more efficient, making sure that the dollars actually go to those who need it and not siphoning half off to the staff that administer or monitor these programs. So I think that's the other argument for basic income, and I think people generally don't know how inefficient these programs are.
Right. There's a judgment made about poor people, but not necessarily about the fact that the interventions we currently have actually keep people there. Instead, there's
Yeah.
this notion that it's people keeping themselves, that everybody's choosing to be in poverty. I know nobody, zero people who say, I really like living in poverty. This is where I want to stay. I mean, there's people who take poverty vows for all kinds of other reasons, philosophical or religious or reasons. But I know nobody who says, yeah, it's really fun not having enough to eat, not knowing where I'm going to sleep, not knowing if
I
I can,
I've asked
live.
everyone, well, again, same. I have not heard a single person refusing cash.
Hmm. Yeah. So you're doing this work. You've there's a rise. We're in a situation now with all kinds of crises, from climate crises and environmental crises and weather crises and economic and the tariffs and homelessness and inflation. If you were talking to whoever the next prime minister is, what would you say to try and convince them to do this?
I would say um, giving people cash is one of the best ways to boost the economy, to make sure that everybody in Canada has a chance to succeed, given the challenging, financial, economic, climate um, circumstances. It's also one of the most efficient. Um, it can cut government spending. It actually can cut, not increase the deficit, for instance. Um, it, I think it makes every sense to do this. Um, yeah, I cannot think of a single backfire effects or a reason not to do it other than just political, ideological concerns that are ungrounded.
Yeah, and discrimination against people who are poor,
Yeah.
who so um, I think that's fantastic. I know that you also agree. We haven't really talked about this part of it. Some people, when they hear efficiencies, think, "Oh, you're just going to be giving cash and forget about programs, social programs or supports." You and I have had these discussions, so I think I have an idea what you're going to say. But do you think that's the approach? Or, I mean, I often say
Yeah.
freeing up the cash and streamlining the administration would actually free up all these young, well, I say young because I'm talking to a lot of students these days, but people who are going into social work or going into psychology or going into, you know, people professions, because they want to assist people. They don't want to be administering money. They want to be actually providing the kinds of supports, whether it's to kids or to people with
Yeah.
disabilities or to the elderly. And so do you want to comment about that? Is what you're
Yeah.
proposing getting rid of all those folks?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I have to emphasize that we need more mental health supports, period. We need more health supports, detox services, rehabilitation centers. We need more housing, more affordable housing. These are bottom lines. I mean, I'm not saying should replace all these supports and services. Absolutely not. Because not everybody well, I'm going to say cash is one solution. It's not the only solution, right? on top of cash, there's a foundation, housing. If there's no housing, cash is useless, right? So we need to provide those services and supports as a condition um, for 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 people to you know to survive. That's the bottom line. Now, some folks who are unhoused need mental health supports, and they need to. For instance, they before they, I think this is kind of my the biggest question or challenge to my work, my cash transfer work is, do you think this will work? Do you think cash transfer will work for everyone who's unhoused? My answer is, of course, no. No, because some people actually they need detox. They need uh, psychiatrists and medications. Um, Cash will help, but in addition to other kinds of supports they need. So I'm not saying efficiency means using cash to replace uh, social health housing services. Absolutely not. It should be in addition. But going back to the inefficiency argument earlier, the way we administer a lot of these anti-poverty programs is just very inefficient. Um, and that's something that we need to reform and streamline.
Hmm. And I know we're going to link to some of the research you've already done, and you've done incredible work assisting us with fact sheets about this area. We'll link those in the podcast notes. Any of your new research, I think it would be fantastic if we can also link to that, because what you're showing is exactly what you just spoke about, and which countries like Scandinavian countries have already been doing. They're linking housing and income supports and showing decreases in healthcare costs and criminal legal costs in terms of and increased happiness, increased well-being indexes across the board. So the fact that you're showing how we could be streamlining the administration and freeing up resources to help provide additional supports while still benefiting the economy, I think is an incredible contribution. And, I'm so grateful to you and your team for all of the teams, because you're working across multiple sectors, you're doing to contribute to this area, because it is so important. And, thank you for that. And is there anything else you want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet before we close off this podcast? Because I know our listeners are going to want to hear more about all of this, and so I'm going to get you back on when you finish this research. Uh, so over to you.
Yeah, I think some some of your listeners probably are not are familiar with basic income, but I just want to point out that we should think about the savings and the benefits, the improvements, and how basic income can actually help us thrive in the long term, in addition to just looking at the costs, which is most basic income proposals say. And I think that's a huge missing piece, and I'm trying to bridge that.
Hmm. And do you want, I know that lots of folks are talking to you. Do you want to talk about some of the prospects coming up, or should we save that for another episode?
Save for next one.
Okay. All right. Deal. We'll have you back on, because there's exciting things happening. Mayors, provinces, organizations I know are talking to you and wanting to develop things. So who knows? Stay tuned, everybody, because we may hear about some new pilots in the very near future. Thank you once again for joining us, and look forward to seeing you soon, and look forward to all of the incredible research that you're producing. And those of you who want more than just what you're going to get access to through the notes to this podcast, look up Jay-Z. We'll have a link to your information at UBC as well, because incredible work you're doing. Thank you so much, and all the best, and all the best with all the scarcity of time that you have right now, because it's end of term. And thank you for your generosity in joining us.
Thank you, Kim.